Today I'm going to build a Warlock entirely around life draining. Can we actually create an unfair playstyle where we just keep draining our enemies and recovering health endlessly? Today's character is Affliction Warlock. There's an old joke that is called Affliction because the Warlock player is the one who's constantly suffering, and honestly, there's some truth to that. Affliction Warlocks are constantly being pressured, interrupted, and focused by the enemy, but they are also built to survive through that pressure. In that sense, Warlock is almost completely opposite of another casters like Mage. A Mage is designed around avoiding damage, keeping enemies away, controlling them, and escaping before they can connect. A Warlock, on the other hand, is much more comfortable taking the hits and surviving through them. And maybe that's why Warlocks have always had so many abilities connected to health, healing, and life draining. In fact, there was once a notorious Warlock playstyle in old school WoW built around Soul Link and Siphon Life. You shared incoming damage with your demon for constant damage reduction while continuously draining health from your enemies to keep yourself alive. And even now in Midnight, Warlocks still have Drain Life. Building an entire playstyle around Drain Life has actually been something I have wanted to make work for a very long time. I've tried making videos around this concept several times before. My most recent attempt was back in the War Within, when I tried stacking as much haste as possible to turn Drain Life into something actually useful. But eventually, I gave up. It was just way too weak to be practical. But patch 12.1 has given us a new talent called Hedonic Gorging. It directly increases Drain Life damage while also strengthening Siphon Life and Dark Harvest, basically tying together Affliction's entire life draining theme. And on top of that, Drain Life itself received a significant buff in 12.1. So maybe this is finally the patch where my old Drain Life dream can actually work. Can we bring back the terror of those old school Soul Link and Siphon Life Warlocks? A Warlock where the enemy keeps hitting you, but your health bar just refuses to go down, while theirs keeping getting drained away. Simply copying the standard meta setup doesn't always give you what you're looking for. Sometimes you need another experienced player to actually look at your character and your gameplay and figure out what could be improved. And that's where Overgear's self-play PvP coaching comes in. You stay on your own character, while an experienced player can review things like your talents, gear, macros, weak auras, and gameplay to find out what might be holding you back. And with patch 12.1 changing classes again, and season 2 resetting PvP ratings, it's actually a pretty good time to rethink your setup. Overgear offers coaching for Arena and rated PvP, and for the season 2 launch, you can use my promo code for 12% off. That's higher than the normal discount and only available for 1 month. So if you want someone to take a closer look at your PvP setup for season 2, check out Overgear through the link in the description. When you think about it, Drain Life sounds like a perfect PvP spell. You are damaging your enemy while turning the damage into health for yourself. On paper, that sounds completely broken. And of course, Blizzard was never going to leave a spell like that untouched. Over the years, Drain Life has been nerfed again and again, to the point where it became much weaker than the fantasy suggests. But for the first time in a long while, patch 12.1 actually buffed it. Its health drain was increased by 25%, and Affliction also gained a new talent which directly increases Drain Life damage and further strengthens Dark Harvest. So if we push Drain Life, Hedonic Gorging, and Dark Harvest as far as possible, we might finally get some very interesting results. For Affliction Warlock, your secondary stats can vary depending on the kind of PvP you're focusing on. Haste is generally extremely valuable, especially in Arena, where faster casts and shorter global cooldowns matter when you're constantly under pressure. But in Battlegrounds, where you have more opportunities to spread dots across multiple targets, you can afford to invest more heavily into Mastery for stronger raw damage. One advantage of this build is that it isn't heavily dependent on one specific secondary stat. Neither Drain Life nor Dark Harvest gets the same direct benefit from Affliction Warlock's Mastery. And while haste is still useful, this build doesn't completely depend on stacking it either. So compared to a normal Affliction setup, you actually have quite a bit of freedom to choose your secondary stats based on your own playstyle. As for the gear, I think going all the way to the Season 2 4-piece actually makes a lot of sense for this build. The 4-piece increases the damage of all your spells and abilities by 2% for each active unstable affliction, up to 6%. And because that's the general damage increase, it can directly make both Drain Life and Dark Harvest hit harder. And for a build based around draining health, more damage also means more healing. So even though the tier set wasn't specifically designed for Drain Life, it actually fits this build surprisingly well. The first thing I tried to complete this life draining build was Hell Collar. The reason was Siphon Life. Siphon Life heals you for 5% of the periodic damage dealt by Corruption, and with Hell Collar, Wither replaces Corruption and can be amplified through the hero talent. So my original idea was simple: make Wither hit as hard as possible and turn that extra damage into more passive healing through Siphon Life. But that turned out to be a miscalculation. No matter how strong I made Wither, Siphon Life was still only healing me for 5% of its periodic damage. But in actual PvP, that simply wasn't enough healing to make a noticeable difference. Maybe on epic battleground, where you can spread Wither across a huge number of enemies at once, it could start adding up. But generally, the healing was nowhere near strong enough to build an entire life draining playstyle around it. So I'm still going to take Siphon Life, because it fits the whole life draining concept of this build, but I'm not going to rely on it very much. So for our hero talent, we are going with Soul Harvester. To be fair, Soul Harvester doesn't really have much to do with life draining itself, but it does fit the offensive side of this build much better. After using Dark Harvest, we can immediately transition into multiple unstable afflictions, spending our soul shards and triggering Soul Harvester's demonic soul effects along the way. For the Warlock talent tree, we are going to take Soul Link to keep that extra layer of damage reduction while our demon is active. And for the affliction tree, instead of sacrificing our pet with Grimoire of Sacrifice, I think Summoner's Embrace fits this build much better. We keep our demon for Soul Link, while also gaining a flat 3% damage increase. Then there are two talents that I consider absolutely essential: Gore Fiend's Avarice and Empowered Drain Life. These are what really push Drain Life into something we can actually build around. The rest of the talent tree is actually pretty flexible. There is one annoying part though: Seeds of Destruction. In Battlegrounds, I'm barely going to use Seeds of Corruption, so spending 2 talent points here feels almost completely wasted. Unfortunately, it's a prerequisite for Hedonic Gorging, so if you want the talent that makes this entire Drain Life experiment possible, it's simply a necessary investment. The PvP talents, on the other hand, are a little more complicated. First, Jinx is just too useful in Battlegrounds to give up, so I'm definitely taking that. For the other 2 slots, I recommend Essence Drain and Rot and Decay. Essence Drain fits this build almost perfectly. As you channel Drain Life into an enemy, you reduce the damage that target deals to you by 9%, stacking up to 4 times. That means against a single target, we can open the fight with Drain Life and gradually reduce their damage against us by up to 36%. Then we have Rot and Decay. Every time Drain Life or Drain Soul deals damage, it extends the duration of agony and corruption on the target by 1 second. Normally in Battlegrounds, you constantly have to worry about refreshing these dots, but with Rot and Decay, simply using Drain Life or Drain Soul keeps those dots running for us. It's especially convenient in one-on-one fights, where we can spend less time refreshing dots and more time draining the enemy instead. And the final key piece of this build is Soul Burn. There is a massive difference between a normal Drain Life and a Soul Burn Empowered Drain Life. When you use Soul Burn before Drain Life, the health you recover doesn't just refill your health bar. It also gives you an Absorb Shield equal to the amount you heal, lasting for 30 seconds and stacking up to 30% of your maximum health. And here's the important part: the Soul Burn shield is separate from Soul Leech. So while Drain Life is restoring your actual health, Soul Burn creates an additional Absorb based on the healing done, while Empowered Drain Life generates Soul Leech based on the damage dealt. That means one channel can give us actual healing plus 2 separate layers of absorption. And when you think about it from the enemy's perspective, This has to be incredibly frustrating. Your health is going down, while the Warlock is draining that health back, healing himself, and building Absorb Shield on top of it. It's basically kind of a fight that can drive your opponent completely insane. Now let's talk about the ideal rotation. Battlegrounds are obviously unpredictable, but think of this as a basic framework. You can adjust it depending on the situation. Start with Curse of Exhaustion. With Jinx, that immediately applies both Corruption and Agony as well. Then, follow it up with Haunt. Haunt already hits pretty hard on its own, but more importantly, it increases all damage I deal to the target for 18 seconds. So ideally, I want Haunt active before using any of my important draining abilities. Then we go straight into Soul Burn and Drain Life. I strongly recommend making a simple macro for these two, because we're going to use this combination constantly. If you can bait an interrupt first and get precognition, that's obviously the best case scenario. But even if the channel gets interrupted, it's not the end of the world. The moment Drain Life starts working, we are already recovering health, building Absorb Shields, and stacking Essence Drain. Then after that, keep applying pressure with Drain Life or Drain Soul, while waiting for Haunt to come back. Once Haunt is ready again, apply it first and go straight into Dark Harvest. This is one of the biggest healing moments of the entire build, so you really want to make sure Dark Harvest gets a clean channel. If necessary, use something like Mortal Coil first to create enough space to safely get the channel off. Then once Dark Harvest is finished, start spending the soul shard you have built up on Unstable Affliction. And if you have generated Succulent Souls, consuming those shards will also trigger Demonic Soul, adding even more shadow damage to the follow-up. So to summarize, our two most important life draining abilities, Soul Burn Drain Life and Dark Harvest, should ideally always come after Hunt. Because this build gives up some of the Affliction Warlock's other key offensive talents, it can feel relatively weak in large teamfights, where raw damage and pressure matter the most. And like most builds that rely heavily on self-healing, it also has a clear weakness against mortal wounds. Against classes that can apply strong healing reduction, this build becomes much less effective than you might expect. But on the other hand, when those weaknesses are not a factor, this build is incredibly strong. With this much damage reduction and self-healing, it becomes especially powerful in one-on-one fights. When I first started working on this life-draining concept, I was actually hoping to create those dramatic comeback moments, dropping to almost to no health, then suddenly draining everything back and turning the fight around. But surprisingly, those situations almost never happened, because my health just wasn't going down. This build can create an incredible sense of helplessness for whoever you're fighting. They can throw everything they have at you, only to watch your health bar keep coming back up. And that's when the fight starts to feel completely hopeless. No matter how much damage they deal, you just keep draining it all back. Eventually, they realize that fighting you is getting them nowhere. And once they have learned their lesson the hard way, the next time they see you, they will flee. And you can actually see it happening with this warrior right here. The first time we fought, he came straight at me, with full confidence. But after I beat him while finishing the fight at basically full health, I guess he realized that this is not going to work. Because the next time we fought, you could literally see him looking for an escape route halfway through the fight. Of course, I wasn't going to let him get away. And the same thing happened with this hunter too. He tried his best to fight me, but once he realized he really couldn't do much against this build, the next time we met, he started avoiding me the moment he saw me. And I'm not even exaggerating. For the rest of the game, he literally kept running away from me every time I came anywhere near him. So after everything I have tested, I think I finally have an answer. This build isn't about killing someone with one massive burst. It's about outlasting them. They deal damage, you drain it back. They try harder, you keep healing, and eventually, something changes. They stop trying to figure out how to kill you, and start trying to figure out how to get away from you.